Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you all are having a great day and a great week so far. Welcome to Midnight Hatter Live, the weekly variety show where we talk Gundam, gaming, and all of that good stuff. I'm your host, Steven, and joining me, as always, is the dashing Adam Blue. How you doing, buddy?
Doing good. Yeah, ready to talk some gaming. Yes, breaking up my week again. I always
Yes.
see this as the way to break up my week. Talk some gaming, crafting. Who knows? Who knows what you're gonna
Yeah,
bring up?
today's topic, I'm glad you're wearing your dad shirt, by the way, because
Oh,
you know
nice.
I gotta be honest,
Always.
I'm like heavy dad mode this week. My daughter, we had to cancel her first birthday this past weekend. My kiddo's
Oh,
homesick with me. She's like under quarantine, so she can't go to daycare or anything. It
ah,
is by God's grace alone that I have not caught this bug. Touch wood, but but yeah, so I've got her home with me, and I have not been able to get anything good done. And so I was like, man, what are we going to talk about this week?
yeah.
And sure enough, I'm on x.com, right? And I saw this video come up, dudes posting their W's, and one of them happened to be this dad that did something amazing for his daughter. And I was like, you know what? That's something that we can talk about. So, and
That's
and we've
cool.
got some other interesting topics to discuss as well. But yeah, how's your
Yeah,
week going?
yeah,
You've been a content machine lately. So you've got
yeah.
three videos out this week. Two of them related to the Nightingale,
Yep. Yeah,
which
that's right.
is
Yeah,
fitting because it's a big kit. It's a big suit. It
I know,
needs.
yeah. So Nightingale GBO2. So then, Bandai sent me the high grade. That was huge. That was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be, and I appreciate that design so much more. Check out the video, you guys haven't.
Yeah.
But it, I, but the other thing is, my kids are starting school too. So like, I feel like there's been this. It's like work, school, because they're going to start, and then my content whenever I can get to it. Although I'm just lucky, I've gotten to a point now where I can kind of pump it out a little faster than normal, with help of Talos. He does help with some of the research. And then
Streamlined.
I had that other video that it was really just going to be a review of the music of that symphonic poem until I decided to translate and read the interview. Like, I didn't really fully read it all until I was doing it live, not live, but when I was recording.
Yeah.
Although I saw some glimpses, but it just, to me, it's amazing how 1980 Tomino and Yaz are bringing up George Lucas, like how
Yeah.
they are looking to him with how to create something within the machine. And I was like, on point. This is the first time, unless it's been brought up anywhere else, the first time they've brought up George Lucas.
mean, I can't think of a specific interview or anything where they specifically referenced him.
Yeah.
But what? A New Hope came out in '77, I want to say.
Yep.
So
Yep. And then Gundam
'79,
79. Yeah.
they definitely would have. Now, granted, media is not as, let's say, easy to access.
Right.
Back then, you
Yeah.
wouldn't have. There's no internet. You can't just look up,
Exactly.
hey,
You're
what's
not
this?
seeing someone, yeah,
What's the
sharing.
latest foreign cinema?
Yep, exactly. So there could have been that little gap, but there's a lot. Again, the reason I got into Gundam was because of the Star Wars similarities there. It just takes it further. And I think that is what Japanese creative culture is good at, is taking a concept and going further than you would expect with it, even if that
Definitely.
means using it as a mirror, like you're looking at yourself or our actual society within whatever that fantasy is.
That's a good way
And
of putting it. I have to say, as much as I credit George Lucas with some of the world building that goes on in Star Wars, and there's a lot of great world building that goes on, it's interesting to me how Gundam has very technical details to the point
yeah,
where, George Lucas is not going to explain to you why some planets you can breathe on and some planets you can't. It's a
yeah,
fantasy story.
that's a
Everyone
good way
can
to
breathe
put it.
everywhere. We're not going to
Yeah,
talk about nitrogen-based life forms versus carbon-based, none of that stuff. Compare that with like Gundam, and they're thinking, man, let's make O'Neill cylinders, and we're going to use centrifugal force to generate
yep,
an artificial gravity for people, and there's so many more technical details involved with the world building in Gundam that I really appreciate. And honestly, a lot of that wasn't even Tomino. That was the animation directors,
right.
and
And
he just
that's what he
really loved the
explained.
ideas that they gave him.
Yeah, and that's what he explained in that interview. Just like George Lucas, it was the idea of working with a team, get having people with you that are experienced in those areas so they can like fully realize what your ideas are. And Tomino was like being very humble in that way, like in the way he
Yeah,
was explaining it, where he's like, I can't do it all. I
exactly.
want to be able, I need other people to, and I thought, yeah, that was just great. Yeah.
That's a theme that I think you and I have talked about over the last couple of weeks is the way that, you can tell you have a really good idea when other people get excited about it, and
Yeah,
then that's where you
exactly.
get the creative juices bubbling up and you can create something as magnificent as Star Wars or Gundam, is when
Yeah.
you get a team of people with a dedicated goal that they're all working towards using their various talents and time.
Yeah. And, kind of related, I've been watching Bubblegum Crisis. I'd never watched it before,
Neither have I.
and, oh, it is amazing. It's gonna be at the top of, like, anime for me, even though my anime is very specific. I seem to be into, like, the '80s horror, cyberpunk, mech
Sure.
style stuff, but I'm surprised with Bubblegum Crisis. Like, even not just when it's showing the technology off, but even the characters, how they react to each other and talk to each other. It's almost realistic without being, what's the term? It's like you can make things of the time and it's almost too cringy,
Mm,
but you can make people react realistically to each other. Uh,
yeah.
I
It
don't
creates
I
that
don't know.
verisimilitude, I guess, is the
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Adding that level of realism,
Yeah.
of how you would expect characters to react to each other, I guess, without it being cringy. So,
I appreciate that. A lot
yeah,
of
me too.
I think a lot of modern media is missing that. You get these kind of characters that are maybe cynical or jaded. They're almost disconnected from their own universe, like they know that they're in a movie, and so they
Oh, yeah.
behave as if it's like, this guy's pointing a gun at me and I'm just gonna laugh in his face and
Well, it's almost like the example I always think of is when Poe Dameron is in front of that Star Destroyer and he does the mom joke. Like, it's like that's no,
yeah.
that wouldn't happen that way. Yeah,
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, we could go on
we could.
about Star Wars for ages, I'm sure. Before we get into today's topic in chief, though, I do want to talk about we are opening the shop back up.
Nice.
I've been diving much heavier into the world of resin cast molding, not just 3D printed, but silicone molds and things like that, which is kind of where
Yeah.
I started this whole YouTube channel in the first
Yeah.
place, was making copies of Gunpla parts. But, I'm a little older, I'm a little wiser now. I've learned from some of the great people out there like Robert Talone, and I'm gonna get back into it. So I've got some of this stuff. This is some Smoothcast 65D. This is I think it's 65D. Smoothcast. It's a white resin plastic that you can cast in silicone molds. It's
Mm.
something that I've worked with a lot in the past, and I've never been able to master it because I didn't appreciate some of the technicalities of it. In fact, on some live streams previously, I've tried to do some resin casting, and as you guys will recall, I might use something like acrylic ink or acrylic paints to try and tint the color of the resin that we're working with. Robert Talone has shown me the light, is that something like this, which is a water-soluble ink, is going to introduce air molecules and bubbles into your resin, which is where you screw up your
Oh.
parts and you end up having air bubbles in your final mold. So, got my hands on some alcohol-based inks,
Oh, okay, there
which
you go.
there are two benefits to this. One is that, you're not going to create any bubbles, but you're also adding some isopropyl alcohol to the resin, which is going to reduce the surface tension, reduce the viscosity of the resin, and so you're going to minimize bubbles even further than if you didn't add inks at all. So, I can't wait to cast some parts using these. So,
Well,
yeah,
have you planned what your first cast is gonna be?
I am glad you mentioned that because right
Okay.
here I've got a Zazabi funnel
Oh,
case,
yeah.
and I think it'd be pretty cool if we had the ability to, mass produce these. And one of the things that I was thinking about doing is, um, for some of like the conversion kits that I wanted to do, it would be nice to tint the parts in different colors, even if you're going to paint them after the fact. Have you ever gotten one of those resin conversion kits and it's just all these it's like individual baggies of little yellow resin parts. You
Yeah,
don't
I know
know
what you
where
mean,
anything
yeah.
goes. There's
I
nothing.
see. So you might tint based on the category of, like, if it's torso or left arm or right arm or something like that?
Exactly. So I
That's
think that
cool.
that's going to add so many more benefits. And there's pros and cons to everything, right? Like 3D printing is relatively easy, but it takes forever. This stuff, this stuff cures in 10 minutes. So
Oh,
in
wow.
in the time that it would take me to 3D print like a Gundam part, I could probably make 6 parts in an hour, like.
Wow.
So there's definitely a benefit to using this stuff over 3D printing. Maybe I'll 3D print the prototypes, but then cast them in silicone and then use pouring resin to kind of mass produce them a lot quicker. I'm looking forward to kind of,
Okay.
like I said, setting up shop, seeing what kind of parts we can manufacture, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing it with you guys.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how this evolves. And I mean, do you plan to do that live sometime?
Yeah, maybe it'd be fun to do some of that
That
live,
would.
especially like I said with this quick cure resin. The silicone takes like 4 hours, so that's probably not something fun to do
Yeah.
live.
No.
But yeah, and again, Robert Talone is the master of the single piece cut mold. As opposed to doing,
Interesting.
and you've seen us do it on stream before,
Yeah.
where we do the 2-part like clay up molds, right?
Right.
Well, the problem with those, and Robert Talone will tell you this himself, is it doesn't matter how good of a sculptor you are never going to create a seam line as perfect as if you just have a piece of rubber that you cut and then the cut parts come back together because they were once one piece. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
but
that's interesting, and I always feel like sometimes with creating things, there's that level of complexity where it's like, you can't make it perfect, but in my mind, it's like either it's gonna be perfect or I'm not gonna do it. You know how you know?
yeah, welcome to my world. Yeah, it's why I've got like dozens of kits that are half built and like.
Yeah.
But no, I think that it's going to be fun getting back into some of this stuff, and hopefully, I can
Cool.
use some of these lessons learned to make some make some changes.
Yeah,
So that said, I think it's probably time to hop into our topic in chief.
sure.
Let me go ahead and hop into the screen share view. Adam, let me know if you can see this.
Okay. Yep, sure can.
Awesome, awesome. So this is actually an article from a couple years ago. I think it's actually from 2020, which, let's face it, 2020, we were all kind of sitting around twiddling our thumbs looking for something to do. A lot of women took
Yeah,
up baking. I took up more Gunpla activities. This
yeah.
incredible dad, uh, what he decided to do was take the Xbox adaptive controller, which now you were in the gaming space for a long time before you got into Gundam.
Yeah,
Do you remember how big a deal the adaptive controller was when it came out?
I do, and people were praising Xbox for that. I mean, it almost started where they would do things like color blindness settings in
Yeah.
games. That's one way to go about it, but what about people that can't even properly articulate, the necessary buttons, the controls? And so seeing that stuff was actually pretty cool, and I've always wondered how much of that was inadvertently sparked by people beating Dark Souls with a Guitar Hero controller. Almost like telling the world it could be done any way. You can train yourself. Like, I feel like sometimes people feel too much like a controller is the way and the only way you could play a game. But our
Yeah.
minds, it reminds me of the inverted look. Like, I always invert my look controls. And
Yeah.
I look at it as this. I'm tilting my head back to look up and pushing down forward to look down. And
That
so
makes
that's how I
sense.
see the world. And so when I'm playing a game, but not everyone sees it like that.
Yeah. Well, and there's
You
so
go
many things that
further.
we take for granted too. Like
Yeah.
you've brought up the whole like left trigger
Oh yeah, that's
to
right. To
look down
aim and that's
sights.
yeah.
Um
And so we're so trained to feel like that's the way that I feel like it only makes sense to have the ability to have adaptive controllers for any scenario, even if you don't need it, but maybe you do, without knowing.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of these things were designed for with people with disabilities in mind. But,
Mhm.
there's probably applications outside of what we are really even capable of thinking about.
Right.
For one thing, I know Logitech, when the adaptive controller came out, they had a whole accessory kit that went with it. Different sized buttons that you could attach to it, different macros. You had foot pedals that could
Foot
be
pedal,
mapped
yeah.
to to the triggers and things like that. So, it's just one of those things where we've always talked about, I think what is it, Steel Battalion, the
Oh,
mech
yeah.
game that's got like its whole control. We could set something up like that. But no,
Yeah.
so what this awesome dad did is, Nintendo, despite Nintendo having a very great reputation when it comes to, considering the player base, they don't have any adaptive controller options.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
so what this guy Rory Steele did was he basically hacked together a Xbox adaptive controller and wired it up with all of these LED lit up buttons that could control not only the uh, I hate when I read some of these articles because they don't fully express the level of detail and care that he put into it. Is some of these buttons actually are macros. And so, for instance, if you've ever
Wow.
played Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, you know that in order to guard, you have to hold down the left trigger. Well, what if you don't have the ability to hold a button and then hit another button? So some of these buttons actually toggle on and off between held interactions and tap interactions.
Ah.
So like for instance, I don't know which button it is on this display, but there is a
Mhm.
button that toggles the shield on and off instead of just hold, like you have to hold the button in order to hold the shield
That's
up.
cool.
That's a that's pretty
Yeah, that is pretty neat. Yeah, especially and I didn't read this article, so did this have to do with his daughter having a disability, or she just had a hard time?
So his daughter does have mobility issues, and so she
Ah,
could never,
okay.
play using the Joy-Cons. But what's funny is, it goes on to say that how excited his younger son was to try using the controller after his older sister did. And there's
Oh,
no
that's
indication
cool.
that his
Yeah.
son has the same
Added this,
disabilities.
yeah.
But so it's just cool to, like you said, maybe you don't even realize that you need an adaptive controller until you see someone else using it and you're like, that
Yeah.
looks awesome. I want to try it.
It reminds me of what we call the autism spectrum, where we assume there's only one true way you're supposed to be, when it
True.
really could be our society has made it seem like someone might be wrong in their mind when they're really not, and I think it's the
Sure.
same thing with controllers. And it reminds me one time, there's a long, long, long time ago. I think I was picking up using Craigslist, like picking up a baby thing I needed. I forget. And the guy I met that was selling it, he didn't have a right arm or right hand, I'm sorry,
Hmm.
but he kept talking about Call of Duty. He plays it all the time competitively. And I was like, "Man, well, I don't mean to I hope this doesn't offend you to ask, but how can you do it?" And he goes, "Oh, I've learned how to adapt by using my wrist in certain areas on the controller and sometimes my mouth." And I was like, "Wow." And it's cool that they've adapted themselves to be able to play and have fun with the game because I love gaming so much. Not being able to do it would be sad. But
Yeah.
I also like that, Xbox created this adaptive controller, and I wish there were more options of that, like just modular sort of
No.
things where the foot pedal is a big deal too, but yeah, modulation in some way where you could,
Exactly.
yeah.
In having programmable macros and things like that, I think are a huge benefit.
Mhm.
Ways to tackle vision impairment or audio impairment. Not that there's a lot of games that are truly reliant on audio. Like
Right.
I think for the longest time, video games have been primarily a visual medium.
Yeah.
But
Right.
but even then, like what if we did start to adapt for people that have vision disabilities and say, maybe try to drive the game using some kind of audio indicators.
Wasn't there a game that just came out recently that, if I'm not mistaken, it was made for blind people? And I wanna
I
say
haven't
it's like an
heard about it.
adventure game. Yeah, where it has to do with the audio. I'll search for it real quick.
Yeah. I mean that's exactly like kind of what we're talking about. And man, it makes me sad because this is one of those things where it's like kind of bittersweet. This dad doing something so wonderful for his kids. And then, you look and you try to find the Xbox adaptive controller now. And as far as I know, I haven't been able to find a place to buy it anywhere. Um,
Huh. Yeah,
which
that's
I hope
k
that they're still continuing support for it. But everything on the Xbox website that I looked at, it's all like 404 errors.
yeah, so that's weird because I wonder how much of it is there just wasn't a need anymore, although I do think that's gonna always come up, or, at
Definitely.
least have it where it's available to have made or ordered. It
Yeah.
was one of those things, like, I feel like we talked about earlier where it's like you do work for free and that creates a client. So if someone can be able to access an Xbox in the first place with an adaptive controller, they will continue to buy games for it, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And and I think that there's probably an onus on developers too. I don't think that developers really ran with the idea of accessibility as much as they probably could have. Now, I'm not one of those people that's going to come out and be like, "You need to make games like this," and these are the things. I'm not going to tell game designers how to make their games, um, because let's face it, there's already journalists out there that are complaining about accessibility for, Dark Souls, but
Yeah,
but
I
not
know.
accessibility in terms of like what we're talking about. They're looking for just ways to experience a story without putting any effort in whatsoever, which we'll get to that later. That's going to be one of the other topics that we're discussing today for sure. But yeah, I think that accessibility is a big deal. And when,
Yeah.
especially like I said, when it comes to those macros and like held trigger combinations and stuff, because even people without disabilities will sometimes have difficulty pairing up all of these kind of button combinations, right? So it's interesting to think about, and it kind of got my brain racing as far as like if I were to design a game in Unity, it's literally one extra line of code that I would add in to delineate between, do you want this to be a held interaction or a toggle interaction?
Mhm.
And I think that that makes a huge difference in the playability of a game. And if you do that for every single interaction of the buttons, where it's like, okay, do you want to hold the X button and then tap Y in order to do this, or do you want to tap X then tap Y? I think that that changes things for a lot of gamers, not just gamers with disabilities, but even just gamers that are not, you know, not as hardcore as you and I are, that are used to holding down several triggers. And
Yeah.
I mean, even if you think about Tears of the Kingdom, where it was like, okay, well, you need to hold this trigger to activate the Ultra Hand ability, and then once you've grabbed it, you hold down this trigger in order to rotate it, and then you want to let go
Yeah.
of that one so that you can move it for. Like, there's too many interactions that I think could have been done with toggles instead of hold interactions.
What if the new Switch 2 is VR? And the point is release Tears of the Kingdom as a VR game so that you can manipulate the item. Like,
Do you
ins
work for Nintendo? Is this some insider information that you're
No,
trying
but
to
I
give us?
mean, because I was thinking, Nintendo did, it's the rumors coming out now. There's leaks about the Switch 2
Yep.
being out by April of next year or something. And what would their next thing be that they revolutionize with? And it's like there's not much they need to do. I think people are going to buy Switches to Switch games for a while. So maybe you
Right.
add more accessibilities or ways to enhance the experience, and it could be VR in a way. And because I just when I think of Tears of the Kingdom, like it's awesome how it added that whole creation ability.
Right.
But to be able to more easily, like if I could look around in the world in VR and then grab this piece, put it here, grab this piece, put it here, move it around instead of like using the controller to
And the Joy-Cons already have motion controls in them.
yeah,
So
they
it's
could have
like
took it way more advantage of that. Yeah.
I'm wondering if I think you're onto something. I think that probably Tears of the Kingdom was supposed to implement motion controllers in order to, really enhance that crafting system. But I
Yeah.
think that maybe Nintendo was a little burned after Skyward Sword.
Yeah, it could have been yeah, a lot of it's funny because a lot of people didn't like that, and I did go back and play Skyward Sword, and this was after the Wii U had already come out. So,
Yeah,
like, the Wii it came out on Wii U already came out. By then, it was a lot easier for me to accept that.
sure.
But with something a point made, about this new Pokemon news that came out is Nintendo is always making games for young people. They're not making games for people that have figured things out,
Yeah.
so they're always gonna keep it easier even if we eventually figure out,
And that
um
was the nice thing about Skyward Sword, is that the difficulty was scaled down in order to account for the interactions being slightly more complicated than, just hitting the X button to slash. It was like,
yeah.
we know that the that the motion controller is going to add a level of complexity, and so we're not going to have the enemies move too quickly for you. Like the enemies are going to expose their blind spots for a
Yeah.
long enough time that you can do your sword slice, all that good stuff. So
Yeah, that was and you know what? I forget if I actually played the Wii U remaster of it, which still had the motion controls as an option, and I think I
yeah,
opted to use it, and um, I forgot how I played it. I think it was Wii U. Yeah,
yeah, it was
but
definitely harder going back to using it after having honestly the most difficult thing about Skyward Sword was, for me anyway, adjusting to not having control of the camera.
oh yeah, that was yeah. I tell you, it's weird what Nintendo does with their games, where they're willing to try new things, but sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah,
But then sometimes later on, it's like okay. Um, Yeah, I don't know. Like how Wind Waker, the graphics of that kinda turned me off, so I didn't play it. But
yeah,
later I played it, I was like, "That's a pretty fun game."
yeah. I mean, it reminds me of Gundam Battle Alliance, where it's like, the SD graphics might turn you off, but the
Oh,
gameplay
yeah.
itself is actually pretty solid. So,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
but yeah, it all goes back to the point that you were making earlier, where really not every game has to have the same controllers. Not every game has to have the
Yeah.
same mechanics or the uh, same ways of interacting with the world. And sometimes you just need to kind of get used to that. Like, there's certainly benefit to all first person shooters having the same, right trigger to shoot, that kind of thing. But like, you know, I
Yeah,
would
I
challenge developers to think outside the box.
Yeah, that's what was making me think, like, what's the next step for controllers? Is it really where there's somehow a controller that could be made that is a little more modular, which I think would be good in general because if one part of a controller breaks, you could just replace it. Right now, if your PlayStation controller breaks a DualSense, you can't like the battery, you can't just replace the battery. That's what I
True.
like about Xbox controllers. You can replace the battery. My Xbox controller, the right trigger started sticking and I was like, "What the heck?" And I was able to take off one of the panels, and what happens is there's a rubber padding for the trigger that wears off over time, and then the glue gets stuck. So I just took it
Oh,
off. I got masking tape, made it like, I don't know, a centimeter, I'm not good at measurements, and then put it in there, and then that
takes care of it.
yeah, and but it makes me think, what if they can make modular controllers, almost like the Joy-Con. Think of how the Joy-Con is, and it can slide into that little thing. But what if you can have it where then there's, the analog sticks, face buttons, triggers, they could be all put in different areas. Like what if I want the triggers at my pinky on the bottom?
Yeah.
Or I
Oh,
want to have all back face buttons where there's no face buttons on the front.
what system am I thinking of that did that? There was a controller that came out. I think it was like,
Xbox had the Elite with the paddles, and then there's third parties that had paddles.
well, no, I
Yeah.
distinctly remember a gamepad that was, similar to like, any modern gamepad, but you could switch which whether you wanted the analog stick in the top left corner or if you wanted the directional pad in the top left
I
corner.
think it was like the Scuff or the third party controllers. I don't know if a first party did it. It's possible,
Yeah,
but,
I mean, but like
um,
you said, just any kind of modular design that
yeah,
would be,
to change it around and then different grip types also. Like, let's say you
yeah.
want thin grips or you want thick grips. I remember how much I loved the Duke on the original Xbox, like a big
Oh
controller,
yeah,
because then I felt like I had, like, full control of it, whereas smaller controllers, it was like
yeah.
I was
You're
gonna
kind
break it. Yeah. So, I think that is the next step for gaming, really, because also, if gaming in the future is going to be in the cloud, so then that's completely accessible to anyone, that next question is, okay, how do they interface with it? Maybe there's these modular universal control systems that can be sold where it's like analog sticks for this, for that, different types of analog, like, and that could make money because then you're buying all these different components and testing them out. And
and
yeah.
and there's already kind of a market for that currently when it comes to like graphic designers and video editors. I don't know if you've seen those like magnetic blocks that, it's like this creator hub, and it's like it's got different dials and switches and
Oh
knobs and things
yeah,
like
I've
that,
seen that.
and you
Yeah.
can adjust it and set the macros on your
Yeah.
computer. Like if you just had something similar to that but for video games,
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I feel like there's so many different things, especially as you're playing games. Maybe you're playing a different game that you want a different setup, or a different genre that you want a different setup. Like, I was playing this pinball game this week, and it just feels weird playing it on an Xbox store. It's like I don't need that,
Yeah.
but I kind of don't want to just sit here on my keyboard. It's like it's like it almost like, oh, that's where the Wii or the um, Switch Joy Cons makes a lot more sense because it's a more relaxed, like left right. Um,
Exactly. Well,
yeah,
or we could all just kind of go the future of Wally. I think it's Logitech that does this, but there's actually a first-person shooter controller that is designed for quadriplegics. And so it,
oh,
mounts to like your head, and you use like eye movements and like your mouth to actually play a first-person shooter.
oh, that's cool.
You know, I'm not a quadriplegic, but I can imagine it would be pretty. I would have mad bragging rights if I beat someone in Call of Duty, not even using my hands.
Yeah, look, ma, no hands. But that's the point. Like, I think we keep coming back to is we're so used to the controllers a certain way, we think that's the way, but I think anyone could adjust to anything. Like,
Right.
while you see some people do inverted or not, you know, mouse and keyboard on some, like, think about how different a mouse and keyboard is to a controller. Yet those were two separate gaming ecosystems that converged. So you had this overlap of like, well, I'll play a first person shooter on a mouse and keyboard, but if I'm on the Xbox playing Halo, that was a huge cultural thing. People learned to do it with a controller. I think that's proven also
True.
that
Yeah, I
it could
think
be any
that
control scheme.
we create these things, and well, controllers are a social construct, okay? Like,
Yeah.
we have this
Look at the
concept
name.
of
Control.
controller. Oh man, yeah. Big video game is coming after us.
Yeah, there you go.
No, but yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think that just recontextualizing things, it's not thinking of them as different or alternative. It's just another way of
Another
playing.
way. Yeah,
It's
the
so
options. Yeah, be more inclusive,
right.
Concave, convex, hey.
Now that said, speaking of inclusivity, I think is a good segue. Um,
Okay.
the Western market is now included in UC Engage.
Oh, yeah. That was a shocking surprise
That was an
when
announcement
I
out of
saw.
nowhere.
Yeah, and, I do on a very small level stuff with Bandai Namco Entertainment America, and from what I learned from them is it's not even published by Bandai Namco Entertainment America.
Wow.
So what I don't know what that means exactly. When one company has multiple companies that then one will be in charge of publishing over the other. I don't know why that is exactly. Like, for instance, the Gundam Battle, or the mobile Gunpla Warfare, whatever that was called, that was Bandai Namco Entertainment America.
Right.
But this is Bandai Namco Entertainment Interactive, I think, or so. It's like a different.
Okay.
Uh, so uh,
Not
I,
BNCI, but BNCS, NCIS,
yeah,
BN. I
yeah.
don't know. It's no.
It's
I'm
great
with
though.
you. There's a lot of
Yeah.
these like what is it? I think Sebastian Maniscalco has the joke about it, like same company, different divisions. Like,
Yeah, sometimes I don't understand that, but I guess when it comes to that much money, they have to like divide it up how it's being used in
sure,
particular about it. Maybe that is responsibility.
true.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, a lot of people are going to download this, and heads will not have to roll. But
Yeah.
yeah. So I haven't actually had a chance to play this, but I think you mentioned that you downloaded the
Yeah.
Japanese version of the game. As I understand it, the gameplay is not anything particularly exciting, but even just scrolling Twitter and seeing some of the animation clips in here, and these are all canon animation, which is fantastic. So you're kind of getting uh, expanded universe stories of UC, right?
Yeah. What I think is cool about the animation, or when you watch the combat, is, well, there's 2 options. There's one where it just does it automatically, which we've seen that in some games, like the Star Wars Galactic Heroes, I think it's called, and there's a Transformers one, I think, on mobile
Yeah.
where it's like you have your groups of your squad or whatever, and then they fight based on their stats, and
I
then you
mean,
can press a
Gundam
button to
Breaker
use the
Mobile had
special.
an auto mode where it was just like
What game?
Gundam Breaker Mobile.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had an auto too. So, but you have an option too to do it manually, so you can set up where you move your troops on the battlefield, and then when they attack, but it's cool if you want to be able to do that. It just doesn't make a difference, but I think I
Yeah.
like that the option's there anyway. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah, but because really at the end of the day, it just matters the stats that you have against a certain unit and then what specials you have or whatever.
Yeah.
And so when I played of it, I thought it was as good as it could be for what it is, which is those, I think I don't know why I keep going to that Star Wars game, but I think that was like I don't play many mobile games. I liked Star Wars, so I played that one.
For
But
sure.
for a type of game where it's almost an auto battler, where it's your squad that you're constantly building up, and then there's all the different currency types and that whole thing.
Of
But
course.
what
Yeah,
it does,
resource manager.
yeah. But what it does here real good is the graphics look badass. Just watching a battle looks badass. Like I remember when I
Yeah.
first saw a video of it, it's like, is this an RTS? And but it
If
wasn't.
only.
And then there's the story. How rarely ever do you get a mobile game with like, as far as I know, with like a good story.
Well,
Um,
isn't there like that Lily's Garden, like that
I
puzzle
don't think.
game that has like a whole murder mystery involved? I
Oh,
don't know.
wow. I have no idea. Yeah, maybe. So yeah, I guess it's not fair. I haven't played many mobile games, but just having the animation, like, because when you choose the levels, you choose it by like series, and then you unlock the next series, and then it's a certain like event that happened within that series, and then there's an animation that goes along with it.
That's
And
so
the
awesome.
animation's beautiful, the drawings are beautiful. So I think it has like the whole package, for a mobile game.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I think that obviously you're always going to be limited in gameplay when it comes to mobile games. So, the idea of it being something that you kind of set and forget is, I think there is an appeal to that. There are some people, I gotta say, one of my really good friends, we all are soccer fans, and so we like playing FIFA or Pro Evolution Soccer and those video games. But his favorite soccer video game is a football manager game where you don't actually play the soccer game. You
yeah.
just are the manager. You negotiate the trade deals for players and stuff. You build up your fantasy team, and then it's like, your result was 1-0, like you won. Like there's
Interesting.
no gameplay to it. It's all resource management and like
Yeah.
but maybe that's the appeal of something like this. And with Gundam Breaker Mobile, nobody actually played the game because the gameplay was fantastic. They wanted to just build the custom suits.
Yeah.
So that's
Well, that's a good question. And then what is this game for? And I think I said in the Discord, it's like a perpetual advertisement of Universal Century. Because it's like
yeah.
if you go to play it, you're gonna be given a lot of animation. You're gonna be given a lot of story about what happens in Universal Century plus the new stuff they added in. Um, yeah, and it says even and more. I mean, look at what it covers. It's
Yeah.
it's almost like G Generation Genesis.
It really is. Yeah, it covers everything. And what I love about the animation in particular, I think that anybody who's going to play this game, or well, anybody that hasn't already played this game, they're going to play it because the same reason that I am is they just want to unlock these beautiful animations. This is
Yep,
like some of the
exactly.
greatest animation that Bandai's put out Gundam wise, and
Yep,
it's hilarious that it's for a mobile game.
I
But
know.
they do such a good job sort of paying homage to the existing show, but just slightly updated, maybe more frames per second in terms of the animation,
Right,
but the colors and like the character design and everything is so accurate
right.
to what came before it, which I think is just
Which
awesome.
and I wonder if that's easy to do or harder to do. Like, I wonder if you have to consciously make it look that way, or because of the lack of technology back then, I wonder if they just come in with only having to use that limited of a tool set. That would be an interesting if there's an interview of that or something, I would love to know the behind the scenes.
Yeah, definitely, because I think that there are some things that are easier and some things that are harder, depending on, kind of the context of what you're looking at. Yes, it's probably a little easier given modern animation techniques to create some of these sequences where you're not having to deal with rotating angles and things like that. A lot of it's done with 3D models, like with the Origin animation.
Yeah.
Those are all 3D models. But, again, that's something that software can come in and kind of fill in the blanks, where if you take a 3D model and you give it that cell shaded treatment, can you recreate a 1970s style animation using 3D models
And
convincingly?
yeah, and isn't it and here's another thing to add in, I've been thinking about this with, like, the Spider-Verse movie and the Ninja Turtles. Isn't it with older animations, it's not like a consistent frame rate, even if it's not a high frame rate, like, because sometimes there might be a cell of animation where there's not movement, but it's moving across the screen, but it's not animated.
Right.
And I think that's what's missing. It's like a variable that would need to be added into the algorithm with which where like it's not a consistent frame rate because you have to still give it that look of sometimes something is not being animated. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, definitely. Yeah,
Okay.
this is something that you and I have talked about before, and it's
Okay.
I mention it on dissecting Gundam a lot. Is those
Oh
still
yeah.
panning shots or like zoom and pan things like that you can really achieve the illusion of motion without having to animate the motion.
Which,
Um,
yeah, if they add those techniques in, that helps sell that this is an
the
older
vintage
animation
look.
instead of like, what they do with Ninja Turtles and Into the Spider-Verse is they just reduce the frame rate. That's all. It's still consistent. Everything that animates is gonna move the same way, so you're never gonna see those limited techniques in use.
Yeah, which is some people prefer that, some people don't appreciate
Right.
that as much. So it's
Yeah.
just you know different strokes, I guess. But
Yeah.
hey, you see Gundam Engage. It's going to be free to play. So if you haven't played it, go ahead and pre-order it on your mobile app store. As far as I can tell, to me, like I said, I'm gonna be getting this game just for the animations, probably unlock mobile suits. I'll max out the Zeta Gundam. But as far as
Yeah,
I'm
of course.
concerned, this might as well be just another one of these idle games, which,
Yeah.
we were talking about what's the future of gaming. Unfortunately, it really does feel like idle games are kind of taking over. I didn't even realize that one of these games, Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms. I remember when this came out and I was really excited. It's a Dungeons and Dragons game. And then when I went to the gameplay for it, first of all, I think it's hilarious that it's available on like PS4 and Xbox One because it really is designed to be a mobile game first.
Yeah.
But it's it's just the characters walking across the screen doing their own thing. You don't control them, you don't interact with it. It's just like I'm going to build a team and then set them on their way. Like is this really But where do you
Yeah.
draw the line when it comes to gaming? Like,
Yeah, you know what? I don't know. Well, to me, Baldur's Gate 3 just came out and everyone is head over heels for it. But when I look at the combat, it's like that's not a game I would play.
no.
Like I know I'm just sitting it's turn-based.
Yeah.
Sometimes turn-based works. Like the reason I like it in the G generation games is because of the tactical nature of the turn-basedness, which I guess that could still be in the Boulder Gate, but at the end of the day, when I'm playing a game, yeah, I'm needing some movement. But let's say there's people that don't play video games, but then something like this, it and it's funny because so my son plays a lot of Roblox, and there's lately been some games that people make where you're still moving around with your character, but then you're interfacing with an idle game or
Now
or a
that's meta.
game yeah,
It's
or
like,
a click yeah, it is pretty crazy, but it will be one of those clicker games, and then he'll just download the auto clicker and then have that run, and then, do his thing, and I think that's interesting, because what at the end of the day, you're getting that dopamine hit because, "Oh, I satisfied this many clicks and got this," and then what's the next thing? And I ask him, I go, "Okay, what does this do for you then?" He's like, "Well, then I'll be level 5,000." And I'm like, "Well, then what?"
and
You know,
then,
and yeah.
and then,
And yeah,
no,
and
and then,
so
no, and then.
yeah,
It's-
no, that's
yeah,
good.
no,
And
it's
so
yeah.
yeah,
What is the sort of challenge, and this is something that we've talked about over the last couple weeks too, is like the level of investment that you put into something is going to
Yeah.
directly impact the level of dopamine, the level of satisfaction, fulfillment that you get out of it. So when you have these types of idle games or these types of, whether it's UC Engage, Idle Champions, a Gundam Breaker Mobile, RIP, um, there's all of these games that it's like the gameplay is non-existent. Now, with the turn-based combat stuff, I understand, we talked about this before where it's like they're trying to adapt a tabletop mechanic into a video game. And I totally respect that. I understand where the inspiration from that comes from. But like something like an idle game seems just silly to me.
It does, and I just wonder if it's a different level of just what someone wants out of gaming. And I came across an interesting thing the other day because at my age, and I'm always about mindfulness and how I feel at any given moment, and I try to assess how I feel and how I interact with the world. I had Sniper Elite 5 came out with its last DLC mission. And the way that game works is each mission is just a giant open world that could take you a weekend to beat because it's a level, but it's not like the whole game. It's just a
Right.
level. And there's different things to unlock, different objectives. And I've noticed because they come out with DLC and then it'll be a few months before another map comes out. I've noticed the time frame where a map comes out and then I spend a couple days beating it. When I beat it, I feel this euphoric sense of peace, where then I am just at peace with everything going on around me in the house, whatever. It's like, wow, I had fun exploring, unlocking, going through, getting headshots of everybody in the map, and then I feel good about it. And it's like I feel like people can, and it's different for everyone, find the type of gratification to get from a game that actually has a positive effect on them. And I think there's a
Yeah.
line though between needing the next hit or then satisfying what you needed at that time. And um
That's a very good way of putting it. I think
yeah.
that there's I think what would you call it? Like biochemical evidence to suggest that that is something that exists not only in video games but in other activities, right? Like we've talked about like the runner's high, where
Yes, exactly.
you hit a certain level of exhaustion that it's euphoric. There's all kinds of activities that you can achieve that level of fulfillment and satisfaction. It's all about hacking our brains anyway, right?
Yep. That's right.
And I think that there's a difference between like maybe is maybe there's a difference between the brain chemicals of like dopamine and oxytocin, right? Where
Mhm.
maybe a gotcha game or like an idle game delivers a quick dopamine hit, but a Souls like or something like Sniper Elite 5 is going to give you that oxytocin hit, that feeling of
Good
warmth and
call.
fulfillment.
It's
Especially
all
when
video games, but different ways your brain is accessing your interaction.
right, because obviously, game developers have done research on this and they've created
Yeah.
games that are, almost I would say chemically addictive.
Yeah.
But the gameplay itself, there's nothing really to write home about. You're pulling the slots,
Oh, yeah, exactly.
so I don't know. It's
It
definitely something worth.
reminds me of when I'm waiting for an order from Amazon, like, that day, I'm like, "Oh, I can't wait." I'm thinking about it all day, like, it's making me happy, and then I get it, and now there's not a thing I can think of regularly to, like, give me an ounce of joy. It's almost like the same thing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, well, and that's one of the reasons that like hope is a drug, because if
Oh, yeah.
you keep hope and you maintain a level of hopefulness, that there's always going to be a light at the end of the tunnel, that there's something good coming from this roller coaster that we're on, then the minor day-to-day inconveniences don't hit quite as hard. Whereas if you're kind of doom pilled about things, then it's like, well, it all is going to end in misery anyway. Like, this is just one more piece of that to deal with. It's like there's definitely a difference in the way that your brain interacts with it.
and and not to go too far in that direction, but I was just watching a video yesterday of a guy using quantum physics, quantum mechanics to prove that staying positive and thinking positive about things, because it's the energy transfer,
Yeah.
it will always lead to a positive outcome. And he was talking about how, like, if something negative could possibly happen, don't dwell on the negative, accept it, and then just think of all the positives.
Yeah. Don't
Even if
be don't be delusional about things. Like, you do have to accept that there are going to be some negative things.
yeah,
Well, and that's it goes back to like kind of stoic philosophy where
yeah,
I'm gonna totally butcher the quote, but it's he suffers most who suffers before it's necessary.
yeah,
So when you're worrying about how bad something might turn out, you're going to
mhm,
dwell on it. You're going to just sit in your own misery.
and that
Whereas
is
if
an
you
energy transfer right there. That's the quantum mechanic part where
yeah,
you're transferring the energy to the negative. So then all your efforts are based in a negative sort of energy state.
which is hilarious because then you think about some of the advice that people are given in terms of like self-improvement, and the example is always like skiing, right? Ski instructors, when they tell people like, hey, don't hit the tree that's in the center of the path on the way down, what does every single skier do? They aim right for the tree and they nail it.
Because they're
Whereas when he
thinking about
says
it.
focus on the path, not the obstacle, they will stay on the
Oh,
path.
yeah, that's another good really good way to tie that in, is to think of the path, not the obstacle.
Yeah.
Yeah, the journey. Yeah, there you go.
So hopefully, and I don't want to like bash people too hard that really enjoy these types of idle games. And like I said, I'm going to be playing UC Engage anyway. But I thought this was an interesting topic for us to discuss because,
Yeah, so are you, I guess, getting to, yeah, again, without bashing, but you're kinda getting to the point where mostly the idle games, it could be person to person what joy it's giving you, but it might be a fake joy. Whereas, yeah, I'm with you with UC Engage, it's like, what am I getting out of it? Well, to be honest, when I'm looking at the fights happen, it looks like the RTS I'd always wanna play, and
yeah,
then you get these badass animations that I wanna watch. Whereas the Star Wars one I played, the graphics weren't great, it was non-canon, I'd have old Obi-Wan fighting with young Obi-Wan, and I'm like, "Okay, what?" And I would just not be happy with it, even though I was still playing it anyway because it's like, "Okay, I got to the next character, I got the
it's
next
Star
character."
Wars.
Yeah,
Um,
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Well, I think that I think that it comes back to like my policy of honesty, right? If you have the
Yeah,
self-awareness to know why you are engaging with a piece of content, then you might recontextualize why you are engaging with it in the first place. I was attracted to that Idle Champions game because I was like, "Oh, hey, Dungeons and Dragons. I like that. Let me check it out." And then when I realized that there was no substance there, I'm not interested in it anymore.
yeah,
Whereas with something like UC Engage, I know that I'm not going into it thinking that this is going to be, the next GBO. I'm going into it with the assumption that like I'm going to take what I want out of the game, which is these fantastic animations and graphics,
yeah,
but I'm not going to get hung up in the, gotta log in and do my dailies like
yeah. Yeah, you know what? You bring up a good point because I've been practicing that lately, for a while now, where it's like I know what I like, and it's easy for me to not think of FOMO when it's like, oh, I'm not going to play that game. A recent thing that an exchange, I think it was just yesterday, was, I don't know if you remember that game Wo Long
oh yeah.
that came out recently. I started and I was like, "Oh, this is fun," but this just seems like an easier Neo, which Neo was a game before that. And
Yeah.
so when I visited my brother, I gave him a copy of Neo on PS4, and he's like, "Wow, this is great." And because I had brought up to him that like Neo's just like a harder Wo Long because he played Wo Long. He's like, "Yeah, Neo's great, but you should finish Wo Long." And I'm like, "Well, I started it and I saw that it's not what I want out of a game, and I've gone out of the idea of just finishing a game just to finish it.
Yeah.
It's I'm." And then he goes, "Well, I bet if it had Gundams in it, you would play it." And I go, "Well, I wasn't playing Gundam Evolution because I recognized I didn't like that game." And
That's a low
that
blow.
he almost I know, but he almost helped me prove to myself that, yeah, I have been very active with what I'm playing. I wasn't playing Gundam. I won't play a game just because it has Gundam in it, because Gundam Evolution, I played it a little bit and it was like, "Yeah, it's not for me.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna
exactly.
keep playing it." Even though I like it, I'll support it, but I'm not gonna play it. And I think that it goes along with mental health when it comes to gaming. So there might be that mobile game, that idle clicker you want to play, but what if that isn't giving you true joy throughout the day. Maybe try to
Exactly.
seek out the game that does,
Right.
like Sniper Elite 5 with me. And so I went back to Sniper Elite 4 so I can play through all those and I'm getting those things. It's like a pastime for me. It's
See,
weird.
you're like the Marie Kondo of gaming. You know, does this mobile game spark joy? If not, then put your phone down and go outside.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
Well, no, I think that's a great note to end on. Is really just, like you said, being mindful, being self-aware, and engaging with content on a level that you're comfortable with and that you find fulfilling to yourself.
Yeah. No, totally. Totally.
Well, with that said, yeah, if you guys haven't already, definitely click the links down in the description below. Check out Adam's videos on the Nightingale, both the kit and the suit itself. I actually am going to have a video dropping this Friday. I finished, the
Ooh,
voiceovers and everything for it, so it is edited
nice.
and ready to go. I'm excited to share that with you. So stay tuned for that. And then, yeah, of course, the Gundam Explained show tomorrow at
Yeah.
11 Central, noon Eastern. Can you give us a little spoiler about what we might be talking about?
You know what? Not yet. You know what I've been thinking of doing though is where it's just a graphic that's just up there that says Gundam Explain Show, and then the bottom says Gundam Explain Show live, episode whatever, and then whatever happens, happens, and then afterwards I can edit the thumbnail and the
That's not a
title
bad idea.
instead of like if I don't know what to talk about, I don't want to like get again. I don't want to steal the joy from my day and not. Oh, I don't know what to talk about. What's the thumbnail? Oh,
That's a
So.
good point. Yeah, I like
But
that.
if I have an idea, I'll always ahead of time, like early in the morning, be like, "All right, the Gundam movie trailer dropped. We're gonna talk about it."
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
hey, if the Gundam movie trailer does drop later this evening, then,
definitely.
obviously
Yeah,
we are not going to talk about it till next week. No, I'm just oh, no, that's awesome. I
yeah,
appreciate that. Keep people wanting.
yeah, yeah.
Good
Well,
deal.
cool.
Well, hey, thank you so much for chatting gaming with me. I know that this is
Oh
always
yeah.
like I love when we have a good gaming topic to talk about,
Oh yeah.
and I hope
Definitely.
you guys in chat enjoyed it as well. Hope you guys, thank you guys for hanging out with us, watching the stream, keeping the chat lively. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your evening, and yeah, we will see you tomorrow.
See you.